Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. There was once an airline so great it became a household name. People around the world dreamt of one day flying with them. Prized for their safety and quality, British Airways was the airline to beat. They put the great in Great Britain. They were the first airline to fly the Concorde and the first airline to introduce lie-flat seats in business class. In fact, there was a period where they would upgrade their seats every couple of years to constantly innovate and push boundaries for what was possible in aviation. How did we go from that to an airline that constantly ranks below its competitors? How did we go from an airline that led the industry to an airline that trails behind? What happened to British Airways? In the 1970s, British Airways was formed following the merger of the British Overseas Airways Corporation and British European Airways. At the time, the airline was state-owned. They had a vast network connecting cities all over the world with a variety of aircraft, including the Concorde. Initially, this supersonic aircraft was not a question of profitability. In its early days, the Concorde was a matter of prestige, which was evident by the fact that its two operators, British Airways and Air France, launched flights on the exact same day, January 21st, 1976. British Airways did not want to come in second. The process of privatizing the airline began in the early 1980s, and that was when they truly began their rise to greatness. Their new chairman transformed the airline from a loss maker to a profit machine, rebranding with the unapologetic slogan, "The world's favorite airline."
British Airways, the world's favorite airline.
They went through significant change during this time, which was conveniently still funded by taxpayers. The most important change occurred to the image of the airline. They went from being that British airline to that British airline by increasing their appeal to business travelers. In 1988, the airline introduced a business class product that was separate from economy class, with dedicated flight attendants and improved catering. This was a wise move as Club World went on to become the carrier's main profit maker, and following its introduction, demand for their flights shot up. British Airways started making money, and a lot of it. What do you do when you start making lots of money? Why not buy up your competition? So British Airways went on a shopping spree, snapping up airlines or at least buying stakes in them from all over the UK and abroad, significantly expanding their global footprint. But there were problems looming on the horizon. Just while British Airways was in the process of being privatized, another private airline appeared, Virgin Atlantic. Unlike previous competition, British Airways could not seem to shake this airline. They tried long and they tried hard, but their efforts were unsuccessful. Following the abolition of the London air traffic distribution rules, Virgin Atlantic gained access to Heathrow, and a truly nasty war began. In the words of David Sarnoff, competition brings out the best in products and the worst in people. This is truly what happened. British Airways was pushed to innovate even more, which saw the introduction of multiple new business class seats, including the Club World lie flat seat, the first fully flat business class seats in the world. This was naturally revolutionary and cemented British Airways as the innovator to keep your eyes on in the airline industry. Meanwhile, Virgin Atlantic was doing everything they could to keep up and went so far as to offer free massages on board their flights in upper class. Competition was pushing them both to be their best. The real turning point was in 1993 when European aviation was deregulated, which led to a massive jump in intra-European travel. However, flights were still quite expensive and the onboard experience somewhat reflected this high cost. Serving meals on board was the norm rather than an exception. How then did British Airways not end up on top, but instead start going the opposite way? When did British Airways enter the race to the bottom? Quick reminder that we're only 50,000 subs away from 500,000, at which point I'll be bringing 3 of you with me on a free flight in Qatar Airways Q Suite. So if you want to take just 1 second to hit that button, you're really helping me out and it costs you nothing. The answer lies in a new type of airline that resulted from European deregulation. The 1990s saw the rise of the European low-cost carrier. I recently made a video about how low-cost carriers work and why they are the most profitable airlines in Europe. I recommend you check it out when you have the time, especially since the video flopped and I need your help getting those views up. Anyway, as airlines were given the freedom to expand following deregulation, we saw flying become accessible to more people. It wasn't something that could be reserved for the wealthy or for an occasional luxury anymore. Now everyone had the pleasure of being able to fly Ryanair. Flying could in fact be for anyone as long as you didn't want to recline. Reclining was still very much for the rich. Don't worry though, there were still true distinctions between airlines in Europe at this point. There were full-service legacy airlines and low-cost airlines. Enter the second half of the 1990s. Something great happened. I was born, but that is unrelated to this video. Around the time I was born, British Airways was starting to suffer among increasing competition and higher fuel prices. Just a few years after their peak, profits were already way down. Things were not going terribly at British Airways per se, but their investments from the previous decade were really draining them. At this point, the once almost universally favored airline was starting to lose its pristine image as the world entered a new century. Then, the attacks of 9/11 devastated the entire industry, shining a spotlight on the fact that a lot was changing. Low-cost airlines were no longer fringe competitors. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with. They operated vastly different business models from British Airways, flying out of secondary airports, charging fees for everything and not even serving free water. And passengers loved it. Well, they loved the low prices at least. People's mindsets around what flying should be was evolving. Suddenly, they realized that better service and a premium airport experience were not worth paying a ticket price 2, 5, or even 10 times higher. Once people start to change, there's little any company can do to stop them. As the famous expression goes, if you can't beat them, join them. Alas, it seemed the days of racing to the top were over. For many years, British Airways had relied on London being a captive market due to slot constraints at Heathrow preventing any real competition. The lack of significant competition at Heathrow, even from Virgin Atlantic, has allowed them much smoother sailing than they would have otherwise had. Combining this lack of competition with the fact that London has ample demand for business and first class, British Airways had nothing pushing them to innovate anymore. Club World, their business class, was and still is generating impressive profits, despite most of the seats being among the worst in the industry. It's difficult to say exactly when it became clear the direction that British Airways was heading. Until 20 years ago, they were a beacon of innovation and quality. Yet, one step at a time, the airline withdrew from its position as an industry leader. Did it start in 2009 following the financial crisis? Did it start in 2014 when Norwegian set up an aggressive long-haul low-cost network in London? Perhaps the most telling sign of the path British Airways was now intent on taking was the 2016 decision to hire Cruz as CEO. He was the former CEO of IAG company Vueling. Sorry, I just felt a little sick even mentioning that airline. He was hired to give British Airways the glow up it needed. He basically performed an extreme home makeover, but instead of building a new house, he tore down a brand new house and forced the residents to move into an old shack instead. Under his leadership, British Airways stopped providing anything for free in Europe, including drinks. They stopped serving 2 meals on many long-haul routes. They removed recline on new deliveries in Europe. They started charging for checked bags. They did everything that passengers hate, which allowed them to lower their prices, which passengers love. And it was incredibly successful. Cruz did what he needed to do and stripped British Airways of its prestige. He knew that the carrier couldn't continue competing in a market where the sole focus was now on price. So British Airways is still a success story. They have adapted to changes in customer preference across decades of different demands and expectations. The change that has occurred is that British Airways has started responding to the market rather than leading it. Their partners, American Airlines, Finnair, and Iberia, introduced new comfortable business class products years before British Airways did. When the airline finally noticed that expectations for business class were changing, they responded with the introduction of club suites and Dough & Co catering. Similarly, if expectations of economy class increased, I'm confident that the airline would respond as well. In a way, British Airways has become a reflection of current market demands. So, what happened to British Airways? Our demands changed, and British Airways changed with them. Speaking of change, my new Squarespace website is finally live. If you want to see where British Airways currently stands in my personal airline rankings, I encourage you to head over to my new website. Over the past month of building my new website on Squarespace, their tool has really grown on me. It really is incredibly easy to customize the look of your website to exactly what you like, and make a visually appealing website with almost no effort. All you have to do is put in the text and the pictures, and the designs will look good by themselves. But of course, the value is that you can make small tweaks and customize as much as you want. Among other things on my new website, my merch store is finally integrated right into the site, and I can't wait to grow it with a blog soon. You can get started with a free trial to see just how simple building a Squarespace website is at squarespace.com, and then go to squarespace.com/nonstopdan to save 10% on your first purchase of a website or domain.